Alright, last time what we did is we learned how to download Python. We ran a few things off the shell. So what we did was we realized we could do multiplication, do division, do different things inside the shell. The problem is though is we're no longer able to save this. So if we have a long process, we want to be able to save this. And the way we do this is we're going to create a file. So go to File, New File right here. Now this gives us a blank document. Now in this blank document, we're going to start off by learning something called a comment. Okay, so I'm going to say this is a comment. And what this hashtag does right here, or the pound sign, whichever you prefer, is this will tell the program to ignore it. So we're writing programs to get the computer to do something. Sometimes it's important for us to tell the computer to do nothing to this line, but we can still have this here so that it can tell us. It gives us information, the programmer. So let's go ahead and go to Run right here and go down to Run Module. When you do that, it's first going to ask you to save it. So I would say my first program. Okay. After it saves, it's going to run it. Now when it runs it, it went through it, and now we're back at the 3 arrows here, which means it's ready for some type of prompt. That's good. It tells us that it ran properly. Okay, it didn't do anything, but we didn't want it to do anything. So now we can go do print my first project. Now notice here, print is a saved value inside of Python. That means if you type it correctly, it turns purple. So if we look here, it turns purple, and it's telling us that it is used as a set saving. In this case, it means it's going to output. And it's going to output whatever I put in here. So in this case, I put a string, my first project. Now let's go ahead and run this, make sure it works. It's going to ask us to save. Okay, and there we go, my first project, and it's done with the program. So we ran the first part of that. Good. Now, a couple things here. With the print, I'm going to do comments when I describe things. To output any message to the user. So remember, we're making a program to do something for a user, either us or someone else. So to the user, use print, and then we're going to put the item, whatever it is, in here. Now if it's a string, which we use right here, then we're going to have to put it in quotes. But there are different types of variables, so let's talk about that. There are many types. I'm going to focus just on 3 types, and those are going to be strings, integers, and floats. So the first one is a string. So I'm going to create a variable here, and I'm going to call this string, and I'm going to put the word string inside of here. Now a comment, what we learned before is this tells the computer not to do anything with this. You can start a line with a comment, but we also can use a comment in the middle. So I'm going to put it right after here and say this is anything inside of the quotes. Now, a lot of times you're going to put letters, but you could also put numbers, and that's going to treat it just as a string, and that's just a group of characters together. The next type of variable, so I'm going to call this an integer. Now notice when I just do int, that's purple, that means int is saved as something. Integer is not though. So now with here, an integer is a whole number. So let's go ahead and put 12. Now these are saved as whole numbers, which also means decimals will be lost. Okay, and then the last one I want to talk about real quick is float. Now float is saved, so I'm going to just put float 1, and let's go 11.11. Now floats save the decimal. Now right now it might seem a little weird that you have some that save the decimal, some don't. Just it's important to note that there are a difference between these. Now if I run my program, what would we expect to see? Notice I'm saving these things in here. I haven't actually outputted them. Remember, we output using this print up here. So if I run this, and we can go ahead and run this, the only thing that the user should see is still my first project. So I ran it right here, and I ran it. This is the second time I ran it, and it just says my first project. That's because I haven't told it to do anything. Now I can go ahead and tell it to print these things out. So I'm going to print, and notice print in whatever item we want here. So this will be string, print, integer, print, float 1. Okay. So now each of these lines, I'm printing out these things as well. So let's go ahead and run that and see what that looks like. Okay, so it went ahead and printed out each of those variables right here. Now, the print is a very powerful thing, but there's a couple different ways we can use prints and doing multiple things in a print. So when we print, there are two powerful tools we can use. The first one is addition. So this adds things together in the print. The only key with this one is they have to be same variable, which means I can add strings together, I can add integers together, and I can have float together. I cannot add a string and an integer float, or a string and a float. So if I go print string plus integer, okay, what I'm going to get here is an error. It asks me to save. Okay, what this is saying is right down here, print string integer, that's the line what's going, and it says type error, must be string, not integer. So the first one is string, and it's saying that this one is not a string. It is a string, but it can't be. Okay, so the way to change this is, instead of a plus sign here, I can use a comma. And a comma isn't adding, it's just printing multiple things in the same line. So run module here. Okay, and now string and then 12. So that prints those two things out separately. Now, say if I do want to print multiple things here. So let's get rid of this integer. Let's just do the string. But let's say I want to print multiple strings off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is up here with string and float, I'm going to add a different line back on up here with the variables added. So I'm going to add string 2 and say this is the second part. And then I'm going to go integer 2, and let's go 13. Now if I want to stick with the addition sign, I can go plus string 2. Now what it's going to do is it's going to treat this as 1, this is 2. Now they're both strings, but I can add them together because they're the same type. So when we run that together, it's literally taking the first one and adding the second one. Notice there's no space here though, because it's just adding those two strings together, and there's no space in either of those strings. So here's just a string, no space, and it starts with a T here, so no space. So if I wanted to add a space, I would actually have to do a plus and add the actual space in here. So this is a string. I can add strings just like this on the side of this one, and I could add another string here. This is the third string. Okay, so I could add as many things inside of there. Run that. This is a string, this is the second part, this is the third string. Okay, no problem there. Now, integer is the same way. I can't add an integer to anything else, but I can add integers together. So print integer plus integer 2. Now notice this is going to just add the numbers together. This isn't going to do anything else. So I shouldn't see a 12 or 13, but I should see the combination of the two, which should be 25. Okay. Now say if you do want to make it a little friendlier to the user, telling what's going on, I can go ahead and then use my comma again. So remember, the comma inside of a print prints both items without adding, and the very powerful thing is here, do not have to be the same type. So I can go print, And I could go string, integer, float1. So if I stick with my original 3 here, I can print all 3 of these at the same time because it's not trying to add them, it's just throwing them inside of an output for the user. Okay, so string 1211.1. Now, say if I want to add the plus sign and the comma together. So let's add our 2 strings, or let's say I'm going to add the 2 integers together, but I want to put a nice format for the user. So I'm going to go integer. Now I'm going to go a comma here because I want a space. I don't want to actually add it. I want to print out the actual integer, so I want it to say 12. Then I want to put a plus sign so the user knows what I'm doing. Now I don't want to add anything yet. I just want to go ahead and put the second integer here, so that's integer 2. Now comma again. Now here I want to put equal so they can see that I'm adding one number plus the other, comma. Now I actually want to use the plus sign. So integer plus integer 2. So what does this look like? Now this looks a little tricky here, but what we're looking at is integer right here. This is just stating the number, so it's not adding anything, and we know that because there's a comma right here. After that, we're just putting in the symbol, so that we have the quotes here, that's indicating that this is a string. So we have a number, and then just a plus sign, and a comma, which means we're just putting in another item, we're not adding it. So put in the second number. Now put in a space here, and then this says equal. So this should say 12 plus 13. We're putting the equal signs, and now I'm actually adding these 2 numbers together. So go ahead and run this. So we get 12 plus 13 equals 25. So I'm using both the comma right here, 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 and here to say I don't want it to add it, I just want to print it how it is. But then I'm actually using the plus sign here to print it out. Okay, the last thing we're going to learn about is inputs. So all computer programming is getting information or displaying information to the user. So one of the most powerful things is getting that information from the user. So an input is a way to get information from the user and save it. So, it's a really important note here. Inputs are naturally saved as strings. That means if you don't specify what it's going to be, a string from the get-go. Now there's ways we're going to change that, and we're going to talk about how we're going to change that. But just a natural input is always going to be saved as a string. So I'm going to create a variable here. So this is going to save it, and I'm going to specify an input. Now, inside the input, I can prompt the user. So it's not saving this, but this is what the user is going to say. It's going to say, what is your name? Now, I like to put a colon after that and a space just so not everything's crammed. It makes it look a little nicer in my opinion. Okay, so what's going on here is this creates a variable. So whatever they put, it's going to save it. This input, see how it turns purple? This is a command here. It's saved as that. And when you type that, it's going to ask the user for information. The user will type in a response, and then it's going to save it as user input. Then what we're going to do is we're going to print hello, comma, and then user input. So whatever name you put in or have the user put in, it's going to return to them and say hello, and then whatever that name is. Okay, so go ahead and run this. Okay, and the last thing it says is, what is your name here? Now we can put any name, doesn't matter what it is. We can put, let's see, Bruce Banner. Okay, I press enter. Now what we expect is it's going to save Bruce Banner as my input. And then in my print, it said hello, comma, and then whatever I put in. So we should get hello Bruce Banner. All right, so I could put in anything, and it's always going to return that because I'm saving that as my input right here. And I said hello, user input. So I could have put in Clark Kent. I could put in anything. Whatever I put in, it's going to spit that back out right in my print. Now, sometimes it's important to save it as an integer. So if you want to input as an integer, we need to tell the computer program to save it as an integer. So let's save this as user integer. Now, as you're coming up with these names here, I haven't really gone into how to do the naming process. The important thing is you can't have any spaces in your names. So notice how instead of having a user space integer, I have to have it together, and so I just capitalize the second word here. So user, capital I, integer. That way I know it's different words, but it's no spaces in between it or else it wouldn't work. Now, usually we put input, and I'm going to say, what is your favorite number? Space, and this here. Now remember, this will naturally save as a string. So to change that, I'm going to do integer, and then I need to put all of this in parentheses. Notice anytime I start a parenthesis, I have to end that parenthesis on the other side. So the integer, I have one right here, and then this one ends it here. Now for the input, it starts right here, and that one ends right here. So I have 2 starting, 2 ending. It has to match up every time. You'll know it matches up because when you do it, it's going to highlight this whole section to say, yep, it started here, ends there. So that's going to get the number from a user. Now let's output something. Let's say that is 10 times smaller than my favorite number, comma. So 10 times smaller. Doesn't matter what they're going to put. I just need it. If their number is to be 10 times smaller, I need my number to be 10 times as big. So all I have to do is 10 times their user integer. Okay, then let's go ahead and run this, make sure it works here. Okay, so again, we still have to run through all parts of the program because the program's saving it all. So we still have to put a name here. This time, let's put Clark Kent. It says, hello, Clark Kent. What is your favorite number? So let's say 34. Now it's saying this number is going to be 34 or 10 times as small. So we should expect to see 340. Now I could put 34. I can put any number. But let's just stick with 34. Now that is 10 times smaller than my favorite number, 340. So what we're doing is we're making it appear that the computer is interacting, but really we're just using a little math here to make it seem like that. Okay, so that's integer. The last one I want to go over here is a float. It's a lot like an integer. So float as an input. So user float. Same thing, has to be one word. Now instead of doing integer to begin with, we just do float to begin with. So input. Let's do what is the radius of your circle. Okay, so notice I have one here, so I need 2 on this side. Everything's highlighted gray after float, so that means it's working here. And then I can do a print the area of that circle is. Now, if you know the area, you know that area is equal to pi r squared. So this is going to be their user float is going to be their r. So I just need to do 3.14 times their user float squared. Now square we could just do multiplied by itself again because that's the equivalent of being squared. Or if we want to use exponents, just do 2 second. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this. Okay, again, it's asking for my name. Let's say Billy Bob. What's your favorite number? Let's this time try 88. And what is the radius of your circle? So let's go 3. Now, 3 squared, give me 9. And then let's say 9 times 3.14 should be, well, we know that 3 times 9 is 27, so it should be a little more than 27. And it's 28.26. Okay, so that's a pretty good practice, just learning inputs and prints. Practice this a lot of times. Next time we're going to work on a Mad Lib to practice just getting inputs and outputting it to the user. All right, let me know if you have any questions.